In this video, we're going to show you how to install a passenger side CV axle on your Nissan Versa located on the passenger side front wheel. I'm going to remove our center cap here using our pry bar. I'm just going to go behind here and just gently pry this out. Remove that cap, set that aside. Using a 21mm socket, let's go ahead and loosen and remove our lug nuts. Set those aside, remove the wheel, and set that aside. On the back side of our brake caliper assembly, we have two 17mm bolts holding the caliper and bracket to the knuckle itself. We're going to go ahead, loosen, and remove these bolts. I'm going to remove the bottom bolt first. Then we're going to remove the top one. There's a reason for that. When we remove the caliper and the bracket, we're going to use our hanger hook here. You can use a securing strap. But when we remove this here, we want to go ahead and hang this up to the side of the strut. We don't want to have any abnormal pressure on our flex hose itself for the brakes. We're going to support that caliper and bracket, pull out that bolt. I'm going to slide this off of the brake rotor. I'm going to put our hook through the bracket and then just bring that up and hang that up on top. Grab your brake rotor, slide that off, and set that aside. Now on the back side here, we have our ABS wire coming down and it goes around to the back side of our knuckle itself. For ease of rotating this here so we can get access to it, I'm actually going to go to the driver's side and I'm going to grab that wheel on that side and I'm going to rotate it. It's a lot easier just grabbing that wheel on the other side, giving us access to this. And this comes around, there's a 10mm bolt on the back side. I'm going to go ahead and loosen that bolt. Now we did soak this down with some rust penetrant. It's going to be pretty key because we have to be careful removing this sensor. Remove that bolt, set it aside. Now I'm going to use a pair of pliers and I'm going to gently grab the ABS sensor here. And I'm just going to grab it and I want to twist it gently back and forth, rotating it in the hole. As I'm doing this here, I'm going to slowly pull it out. Now while you're doing this here, if you can get it out just a little bit, go ahead and spray some more rust penetrant down inside, push it back in, and then continue to work this out. You want to be careful not to break this. It's plastic. Spin that out. And there is your sensor itself. If you follow this wire up, there's a rubber grommet right here in the bracket. Simply grab that and pull it out. You're just going to tuck that up on the side. Disconnect your tie rod. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to loosen and remove the nut. Use a hammer. I'm going to go ahead and smack the knuckle here. That should pop that tie rod end out. On the center of our CV axle here, we have a cotter pin. We're going to use some pliers or cutters here. And we're just going to grab the tail end of this and we're going to stretch out that leg on that cotter pin, straighten it out. Now, sometimes you might have two of these here, one bent up on one side and then the other one bent up the other. Ours only has one. Now a cotter pin is a one-time use. So once we remove this here, you're gonna throw it out. Use your pliers, grab that cotter pin and just kind of rock it on that nut and keep on doing that, pulling that cotter pin out. Use a 30mm socket to loosen the CV axle nut. And set that aside. Now the CV axle here slides on these splines on the inside of the wheel hub. Now go ahead and push on this. And normally the CV axle will slide back and forth on those splines. Ours is not moving. So we're gonna go ahead and soak down the splines here with some rust penetrant and let that set for a little bit. Now our CV axle is kind of stuck. We're gonna use our air hammer and we're gonna put it right in the center here to try and loosen this up. Here we have it. That's nice and free, so that'll come out. Now I'm gonna reposition our caliper. We're gonna slide this over on the spring over to this side here. Still supporting this here. But the next thing we wanna do is we wanna remove the two large bolts supporting our strut to the knuckle. Go ahead and move the ABS wire off to the side. Be careful not to dent or damage that. Using a 21mm socket on the nut and a 21mm wrench on the other side, we're gonna go ahead and loosen this. We're gonna leave the bolts in for now, but we're just gonna zip the nuts off on both of these. Remove that wrench. Remove the bolts. Now when you remove the second bolt, the knuckle will separate from the strut. As you do that, you can push the CV axle in and just work the axle out from the back side. Now if you follow the CV axle up inside, you're going to come to the inner boot. And if you continue in, you're going to find a plate on the back side. There's a 13mm bolt on the top as well on the bottom of this plate. Now I'm going to put my extension with my 13mm in front of our strut. Put that in there and remove that bolt. There it is right there. And go ahead and get to that lower bolt here. We're behind the strut now to gain access to this one. You can see as I remove that bolt, the bracket comes off. I'm going to slide that out. This is the unit right here. Go ahead and set that aside. Now the inboard part of our CV axle goes into this bracket. There's a bearing that supports this here, and then the CV axle continues through and goes into our transmission. Now I want to go ahead and pop that bearing out of this bracket or carrier unit. I'm just going to use my hammer and I'm going to tap the back side here, trying to get that bearing out. Now the hammer itself didn't pop this out. I'm going to use a pry bar and I'm going to go behind the stub shaft here in this bracket and I'm going to gently pry outward. Maybe try a combination of the two. All right, ours doesn't want to come out. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the axle with this bracket. We're going to remove this bolt here, and there's two on the top, and we're going to pull this whole unit out with the axle. Using our 16mm socket, let's loosen and remove these bolts. The fourth bolt is up above the inner CV axle, up on top. Now I'm able to reach up on top here and spin these bolts out by hand once they've been broken free. All right, there's the 4th bolt. We're going to go ahead and pull our whole axle out with the bracket. This whole unit is going to pull out of our transmission. Now you want to have a catch can or a bucket underneath the vehicle. When you pull your axle out, transmission fluid will come out of this here. You want to be able to collect that. I'm going to use my hammer and I'm going to hit the inner CV axle and work this whole axle out. And it appears our transmission was a little low on fluid because fluid would normally come flushing out of this here. Now we can go ahead and pull this whole unit out with the bracket. Now we have our aluminum bracket here. We have to be super careful not to break these ears off. We also want to get this out of the unit. So what I'm going to do is I have this on the flat ground. I'm going to step on these back ears here to support it. I'm going to use my hammer to hit that axle and try and push that through. Now we did soak this for a long time. Here's our bracket. We want to go ahead and clean out the rust inside here, a little corrosion. And then we'll go ahead and discard our axle. We're going to clean out some of the rust or the corrosion in here. You want to be careful not to grind any of the aluminum away. Just clean up the debris inside. Then we clean everything up, just use some solvent. Wipe that out. You want to go ahead and install our bracket. You want to pay attention. On the top portion of the bracket, there's going to be 2 little nubs that actually fit into little holes on the side of the engine or in the aluminum. It's kind of alignment pins, if you may. Get those to line up. I'm going to get all 4 of these bolts started by hand. Nice thing here is that all 4 of the bolts are the same length, same size, so it doesn't matter what bolt goes where. I'm going to thread these in as far as I can by hand. And then we'll come back and we'll snug those down. Then we'll go ahead and snug these down. Once that bolt bottoms out, a little bit less than a quarter of a turn. You want them to be snug, but you don't want them to be over tight because you don't want to strip the bolt out of the aluminum. Okay. Before we install our axle, you want to go ahead and inspect the axle seal right here. I'm going to use a clean towel, wipe it out. And what you want to do is you want to inspect the seal for any tears or anything like that that would cause an issue with sealing the new axle. We don't want fluid to leak out of this here. So wipe it down, do an inspection. If this seal is damaged in any way, now's the time to replace it. Ours is looking good, so we're going to go ahead and install our axle now. Now we're going to feed our axle in underneath the strut. We're going to feed this through because we have to get our bearing inside of that housing there. Now as you feed the bearing up into the carrier unit, you're going to feed the axle shaft into the transmission together. Put it into the transmission. We're going to rotate that shaft so that you can feel the splines interlock into the transmission. Now once this goes in here, we're going to go ahead and watch that bearing go into the carrier. Now once it's at that point there, I'm going to use a mallet, a rubber mallet, and I'm going to strike the end of the CV axle to go ahead and pop that in. Go ahead and raise up that CV axle, and then we're going to tap the end in. Now at this point here, our axle, you can feel, is seated in the transmission. Now that you can see that the bearing is set into the carrier bracket here, next let's install the retainer. Install our retainer here. Want to go ahead and get those bolts lined up. I'm going to thread in our lower one and then get that upper bolt installed. I'm going to go ahead and thread these down as far as I can by hand. And then we'll snug them down with the ratchet. Let's go ahead and put our socket on that upper bolt here. Let's tighten that down. And once that bolt bottoms out, you just want to snug that in. Don't make it super, super tight, but you do want it tight. Snug that one down. Go ahead and bend that knuckle down. I'm going to work the CV axle into the hub and then push the knuckle up into the strut. Let's go ahead and work the bolt in. I'm just going to wiggle this a little bit, pop that bolt in. We're going to do the same for the bottom. Rock this back and forth. With both of those bolts in, let's go ahead and get the two nuts started on those bolts. With those two started, I'm going to go ahead and bring our ABS sensor down, and we can go ahead and slide our brake caliper back over to the other side. Let's go ahead and tighten down these bolts. So at this point here, we can go ahead and install our ABS sensor. Line that up, work that down inside. Install the bolt. Thread that down as far as you can by hand. And we just want to snug this. Once it bottoms out, just a hair bit more, that's all you need. And then don't forget to reinstall the harness with the grommet right here on the top. Push that back into the strut brace. Now I went ahead and put a small coat of anti-seize compound around here. Let's go ahead and spin on our axle nut. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down. Let's go ahead and slide our brake rotor on. I'm going to go ahead and spin one of the lug nuts on. This will hold our rotor in place and keep it seated up against the hub. Grab your brake caliper, remove that strap or hook or whatever you have supporting that. I'm going to slide this into place. I'm going to go ahead and line up your bracket here. I'm going to try and get the upper one started first. Get that lined up. I'm going to thread that in a few threads. Once that's lined up and threaded in, make it a little bit easier for that bottom one. We got both of the bolts started. Let's go ahead and snug those down with our ratchet. Torque down the caliper bracket bolts to 62 foot-pounds. Torque down our knuckle to strut bolts to 129 foot-pounds. Now at this point here, you want to go ahead and grab that rotor and go ahead and rotate this here. You want to make sure that there's no abnormal friction from the backing plate hitting the rotor or any abnormal noises here. I'm going to take a second lug nut and install this here right beside the other one. Now the purpose of this here is we're going to use that for leverage when we go to torque down our axle nut. Now we're going to torque this to 83 foot-pounds. We're going to use our pry bar between the two lug nuts here. All right, we're all set with that. We'll go ahead and remove those lug nuts. Take your tie rod end. Get that nut installed. Let's tighten that down. Go ahead and torque down the tie rod nut to 25 foot-pounds. Take your cotter pin, insert that, and take your pliers. I like to grab the longer of the two tails here and bend that over. Just going to tap that down and then cut off the excess. Now that we have that cotter pin in, you head on over to the other wheel. Go ahead and spin that around, make that nice and level, and we'll go ahead and install our wheel. Get all of our lug nuts started by hand. Once these are all on, come on back and we'll snug them down. Torque down our lug nuts to 83 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, and if you have a center cap, go ahead and pop this on. You want to go ahead and pay attention to locate that little notch. This is going to accommodate the valve stem on the wheel. You want to line that up first, and then go ahead and tap this on. With our hood open, you want to go ahead and access our air intake tube here. You can use your trim tool. There's normally two buttons here securing this here. I'm going to go ahead and remove the one that we have. Next step you want to do is pull up on this. I'm going to pop up our box here. Go ahead and pop this off of the vehicle. I'm going to separate the tube in the back here. Use a small pocket screwdriver. We're just gonna undo the little retainer clips right here. Pull up in this whole unit, set it aside. Now that we have that portion of the air intake box removed, we're gonna go ahead and locate our transmission dipstick tube right here. This goes into our CVT transmission. You're gonna grab that, pull it out, and have a towel. And what we want to take a look at, I'm going to give this a wipe. And on here, there's a cross hatch section that we want to keep that fluid into. And it's down to the next tab down here that has a notch. It is low, so we want to make sure that when we fill up or top off our transmission, it is inside the mark with the section with the cross hatching in it. So we're going to put this back in. We need to start up the vehicle, get the transmission fluid up to operating temperature. So we just go back from warming up the vehicle, and right here we are down quite a bit. That's probably roughly a good quart and a half or so of fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe this, set that aside, put our funnel in, and we're going to use some specific CVT transmission fluid, and we're going to go ahead and add this fluid. Now what you're going to want to do at home is at this point here, pull the funnel, put the dipstick back in, start up the vehicle, with it in park, come back out, use the dipstick, check that fluid. With it running in park, check the fluid. You want it to be warm. We've already done this here. I know that it's going to take about a quart and a half to go ahead and fill up the system. Then we'll start up our vehicle and double check just like you would do at home. Go ahead and remove that funnel, put in your dipstick, and go ahead and fire it up. Let it run for a few minutes, and then check it again. So we have our vehicle running, it's been warmed up. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that tube. You wanna go ahead and wipe this down. Put it back in, and we're gonna go ahead and check that fluid, make sure that we are inside those cross hatch marks there. Yep, we're right where we need to be. Go ahead and reinstall this here. Let's go ahead and reinstall the rest of our air intake box here. When installing the air intake components here, there are two pins that you want to pay attention to. There's one on the very bottom here that's going to go into a rubber grommet down below. And then we have this one up top here that's going to get pressed in up top. You want to go ahead and line these components up, as well as lining this up with the air intake box. So pop that together. Pop these down into position. Reinstall the two plastic push pins that you probably have on your vehicle. Ours has one. And I'll go ahead and pop that in, and just install the other one if you have it.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.